You're listening to episode 132 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Jylani Brown joins us to speak about teaching people of color and a younger generation of meditators. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is made available from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going. And if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. One of the appropriate criticisms of many mindfulness communities is that they lack diversity, representing affluent white people and having a lack of people of color. When there are people of color retreats, they often get criticized as promoting divisiveness. Such critics don't often understand the need for places of safety, if not implicit welcome, because they have only ever experienced the privilege that promotes racism. That understanding is starting to grow, and with teachers like today's guest, action can be taken to open mindfulness to a younger generation of color. Jylani Brown is a Mindful Schools certified instructor, founder of the Practice Peace Project, Black Lotus Rising, and is a veteran educator bringing many years of experience within public, private, and independent schools to her work with youth. She is extremely deliberate about integrating diverse children's literature and culturally relevant content into the programming. Social justice and issues of global competence are frequent themes in her work that encourage preliminary and deeper contemplation. As a woman, mother, and teacher of African descent, Jylani takes pride in creating space for both her cultural heritage and expression to be an integral part of her mindfulness practice. Jylani encourages and facilitates programs that offer every participant the opportunity to see themselves fully in the moment and to honor their culture in their practice as well. Our guest today is Jylani Brown. Jylani, welcome to the podcast. Very glad to be speaking with you today.
Thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to it. I'm happy to be here.
So let's just dive right in. Why don't you tell us about your background, where you're from?
Okay, well, I'm a Brooklyn girl, straight from New York, born in Brooklyn, as are my two daughters and my parents. We have a strong Brooklyn by way of the South family on both sides, and spent some time growing up in Long Island also, and went away to college and came back, and just have lived several places, but in my heart, I'm always a Brooklyn girl, and I always return home as I have many family members still there. So yeah, that's my growing up situation, some suburban, but a lot of urban in my young adult years coming up too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned school. Tell me about the education, where you, because I know you're a veteran educator too, and tell us a bit about
Yeah. Yeah, so I went to University of Virginia, and I also went to St. Joseph's College in Brooklyn. I went to Bank Street Graduate School Program Education and Loyola as well. So I've done a lot of things in education because that's where my passion is, working with young people and providing information and creating and developing curriculum and programming. So I also, interestingly enough, have professional background in the health sciences as a nurse. So all the women in my family are pretty much either in the healthcare field or the education field, and I'm the same.
And how about with mindfulness? How did that first enter your life?
Yeah, so mindfulness came to me because as a single mom with two girls and keeping our lives very busy, same things. So I'd be running and making sure that they were in this class and that class and trying to find the one thing that could be for me. And of mindfulness, well, meditation and yoga practice became more meditation than anything, as I found great solace and calm energy from that. And a lot of times, especially being in urban environments, you walk out your door and life is happening like full blast. And it just didn't stop because I would be working, I would be in school, I would take them to graduate school with me. So we'd be on buses and trains and up and down subway steps, and our lives were pretty hectic. And finding time for my meditation practice was the moment where I could really be at home in my body and find calm. And also, my girls came to know, oh, mom's sitting in quiet. This is the time for us to be quiet. Let's leave her alone. So that was the time for us to really be able to develop a sort of routine around what it was that I needed in order to be the best mother that I could be, and the best teacher and the best student and all of those things.
And it sounds like the girls understood that they gave you that space to do. And that's fairly uncommon from what I've seen with kids, is that they will tend to, no, really got to interrupt, got to have your attention, got to have your attention. But it sounds like the girls didn't do that. They supported you in this.
Yeah, believe it or not, I think they were very attuned to my energy because it's either mom is going to be quiet and calm or the opposite of that. And for them, it was like, okay, let's let her do this. Otherwise, we get to experience something that's not so mindful and calm. So it had its balance. And then because they watched me and I was an example and a model for it, it also became something that they were able to adopt in moments of needing space as well, because they always shared a room. So they had like bunk bed situations. We would typically have a 2-bedroom and they would be in there together. And oftentimes when you're sharing a room with a sibling, whether it's the older sibling or the younger sibling, you don't really have a lot of privacy. But in those moments, they were allowed to have the privacy. If someone didn't want to be in the space, they needed a little time to be quiet, because I tend to have that time, like, I need my time. So children mimic what you do, and they would begin to say to me or to each other, I need my time. And that would become our way of letting each other know that the person needed some time to themselves. And then our practice just kind of grew out of that and extended outward into the things that we were doing in the world, how we were in the world, but also the environments and affecting that too.
Yeah, one of the things that becomes clear as I look through the posts that you have on your Facebook, which is how I found you and the work that you're doing, is that it seems that living with intentional love, and not just love, but an intentional choice to make love a part of your life, is really important. And I'm wondering how living with that intentional love has changed things for you over time.
Yeah, so it is very intentional. I think the natural human response is the negativity bias, right? We know a lot about that. Science speaks to that. Research speaks to that. And I had to be really deliberate in my parenting, especially, but also in my classroom settings, because I've been a teacher in urban environments and I've been a teacher in suburban independent school environments. So I have the breadth of experience. But what I know to be true is that many and most families have challenges. So whether you're coming from urban environments or you're coming from pristine suburban environments, children often carry the weight of that when they show up in their classrooms. And sometimes they don't have the language for it. And although school is a place of learning, we spend the most time, teachers spend the most time in a child's day, their waking moments with them. And when they arrive in ways that are not fully present or fully whole or embodying joy and happiness the way that we typically see young people, then we know that something is out of balance. And for me, not having all of the answers and not necessarily knowing everything that's going on in their homes, the only thing that I have that is consistent and universal is my loving energy, right? So that's the place that I start and finish. Start the day in that way with young people and end the day. So at least during the time that we spent together, whether it was me alone in the classroom as a lead teacher or if I had an assistant, I've always been really fortunate to be in places where the adults were in full support of applying love first and everything else later. And that was, like I said, even in urban environments that could be particularly hectic and the resources were low, what we did have was the ability to be in community and to direct that type of loving attention to the students. So if they were coming to school with anything other than a full sense of themselves and a love for themselves, that we could reinforce and support them with that.
It's interesting as you talk about love for self and others, that when we do a loving kindness meditation, for example, that extending kindness and love towards others, people seem to get that fairly easily, and they can picture someone they care about and extend that. And then when we try to turn that light around and showcase it towards ourselves, it can be a little more difficult. Have you run into that as in your role in teaching mindfulness, or just as a teacher with kids and sharing that, that love can be turned inward as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in my teaching of mindfulness, I've done whole school implementation. So that means that everybody in the building, from the students in the building to the office staff to all the teachers and even the administrators. And what I find most interesting is that when you get teachers and administrators and the adults who are responsible for the youth in the building together as a collective to work with mindfulness, meta is one of the biggest challenges. Like knowing that you're a human being coming into the space carrying a lot, and you have to be conscientious about applying loving energy towards yourself. Otherwise, you're almost not any good to anybody else. When you walk in that building, it's easy to say, leave everything behind, but we're human beings and we're emotive and we carry energy with us, and having a sense of self-love and deep attention to what's arising in your body and applying love and forgiveness and non-judgment to that is something that adults need to learn most immediately, because we do take that piece for granted, wanting to give and pour out so much. And the young people, most times they haven't heard that language before. Most times there aren't many people in their lives who are advising them or even holding a safe enough space for them to understand what it means to love themselves. A lot of times it can be misconstrued with being selfish and self-absorbed, but that isn't it at all. It's more an application of having a heightened awareness as to what your needs are, so you could be more communicative, right? That's the first thing about what's happening with you, and also a sense of the awareness that can help you inform how you move forward, right? To have to know the impact of how the outward world is affecting your inward world. And that's a really, really big part of sharing mindfulness in schools with young people, is that so they know that their presence is felt, whether they're choosing to do it or not. It's the truth. Their energy is emitting, and that they have some power, because a lot of times young people feel like they have no agency whatsoever about what's happening in their lives, but they do have agency of how they want to manage or micromanage what's going on the inside. So I appreciate my studies and my teachers for helping me with that and giving me the strength and the agency to be able to share that forward.
Yeah, and it's true. You brought this up. It's a very good point that so many people don't have the language. The kids don't get spoken to about this. They don't have the words for it because the adults in their lives have never been given this language and don't
Yeah.
really know how to describe it or to connect in this way with open-heartedness, and that
Yeah.
happily is something that we can choose to be more aware of, practice, and
Yeah.
work on a little bit together. And another thing you raised, particularly in settings with kids, is that it's not just a program for the kids, that there's a greater
Mm-hmm.
context. They're part of an ecosystem, and having the
Yeah.
staff, the teachers, the administrators also part of this, that really, I think, focuses on the credibility of what you're doing. When the kids can see the
Mm-hmm.
adults are doing this too. And, the grouchy old math teacher is changing a little bit. And wow, okay, there's something here too. They're human too. And then things start to really, really build in a positive energy. So really glad to hear you saying about that too. Shift a little bit into, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is that in our mindfulness community is one of the things that's come up as, I think, a valid criticism is that they aren't really representative of the communities that they're in. The people of color
Mm-hmm.
have typically been well represented in mindfulness communities. That has been so in the Monday community at the Center for Mindfulness. I've been hosting for the past few years, and that's something that's really got to change. And I wanted to ask you if that's something that you're starting to see a shift. Is that starting to change?
The awareness that is an issue is changing. What would really bring about change is having more mindfulness practitioners of color working directly in the communities that they represent, because it's only natural for levels of trust and community and familiarity to heighten when it's somebody from within, right? There's, especially if you're bringing in something new or what's perceived to be something new, it really helps to have someone similar to you in some way, shape, fashion, or form presenting this to you so you feel most comfortable. What I will say is mindfulness and all the behaviors associated with it are certainly not new to communities of color, right? I mean, we from the inception of being in this country have been doing nothing but pouring out and giving and reinventing and being resilient and having to hold ourselves in safe spaces and containers just so that we could survive.
Yeah.
So when mindfulness comes and people are talking about suffering, we pretty much know about the suffering piece. We have that in our community. We're well aware of what it looks like in various forms. And we've adapted, and when I say we, I mean communities of color have adapted a variety of different ways of meeting that suffering and a variety of different ways of managing the joy as well. So all of that is mindful behavior. Now, bringing it into schools directly, it would definitely be beneficial to have people of color actually bringing this into the schools and the communities that they are in, side by side with other practitioners. So I don't necessarily think that anything has to be exclusive, but it needs to be inclusive. And that's where the communities that I'm moving in right now are beginning to realize that they need to be much, much more inclusive, because traditionally, to really become a stronger practitioner with a deeper practice, you need to be around teachers. You need to have access to retreats. You need to have access to workshops. And that type of learning and experience comes at a price, right? And it also has to be in your community. It needs to be convenient. Many people are householders,
Right.
and you don't have months and years to do a monastic experience for you to gain the type of deep practice that many of the Western teachers have had. So there have to be alternative ways to be able to access this information and to be able to practice alone on retreat, but also in community, and to be feeling safe in those communities. So the language needs to be responsive for what's happening in the community. And I see that most in schools. The ways that people in different organizations and also communities use language is really important. So you have to be sensitive to that. And you also have to have a trauma informed, but a healing, solution oriented perspective when you're coming into environments that are so deeply affected by institutional racism and whiteness and white supremacy and patriarchy. Like, the language has to shift.
Right.
So that's where people like Reverend Angel Kyoto and Lama Rod with Radical Dharma, when they bring their literature and their discussions into the larger mindfulness community, it helps everybody. It gives everybody information that they didn't have. And it also helps to hold people accountable, because now that you know, how are you going to engage?
Yeah.
Right? It's not enough to just know. And there's a lot of work that is being done, but there's a lot more work that has to continue to be done. I mean, obviously, we have a political climate that is very challenging right now, but for people of color, this isn't new, right? The newness is for communities outside of the colored communities, right? The newness and the outrageousness and the horrific behaviors, that's new to everybody else, but it's not new to us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And although I am, of course, anyone who has done any, either through their lived experience as a person of color or other marginalized group, or perhaps, other white people, and doing their research and doing their homework, finding that no, the literally whitewashed stories they were given in their education are incomplete and really, in some ways, particularly dishonest. And just horrified by some of the things I still see today, around slavery. And, oh no, the slaves wanted to be slaves, and other, just nonsense like that. And seeing that awareness is starting to shift. I think a great deal of that from social media, from the efforts of things like Black Lives Matter and others, that there's a greater awareness. But as you just said, and this is one of the things I really like that you mentioned, is it's not just the awareness. It's also taking action. It's also making decisions to change. In conversations with friends at East Bay Meditation Center, for example, having people in positions of leadership. It's particularly difficult to do after an institution has already been set up, particularly if it's been in place for a long time. Getting the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Committee going and keeping going at the mindfulness, which has been in place for 40 years, is really tough. A lot of institutional hurdles towards getting this change in, let alone getting, a woman of color as chairman of that group to really get the support she needs for these kinds of efforts. So it's a lot easier when you're starting with something new and you can get those good foundation stones in place right away. So the direction you're going to go in is one that's going to be inclusive of the whole community, not just those who are able to afford flying off to another country to be on retreat for 3 months. We can't all do that. It really needs to be accessible to the communities that they serve.
One of the things that I think is important about bringing people of color into spaces is not so much just having the bodies there, but bringing the people in their bodies with their sense of culture and what that looks like. So oftentimes people...
it is complex, and it is, shall we say, particularly acrimonious. And how mindfulness, how our practice, how that connection within communities, while respecting the cultural context, people's backgrounds, because it's not all the same for everybody. And that can be really challenging to navigate when you have a heterogeneous community. When you got people with lots of different backgrounds together. That can be really tricky, but that's also, I think, part of the strength of having that inclusion and diversity and equity within a community, is that they can only strengthen it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And suffering isn't exclusive to people of color, right? So there's all levels of people in spaces who have valid reasons for wanting to find a practice that brings them a sense of wellness, and the application for all of the literature, no matter what the lineage is, or if you choose not to prescribe to any particular literature, is always to apply self-love. It's as simple as when we have the analogy of going on the plane and you give yourself the oxygen before you give it to the children. as people in a community working together, we need to be taking care of ourselves. And that's where, for me, the self-love piece is so, so critical for any sense of conscious breathing, conscious awareness. It has to start from within, because happier people engage in the world in happier ways. And that has to be the theme for us to have any level of change. And I know, having worked with Holistic Life Foundation and having studied and worked with Reverend Angel, and talking about the radical dharma is about infusing love throughout everything. So if that's the foundation and the platform that we're all working from, that's universal. And then from there, we go out and dismantle institutions, right? It's not even about making changes in institutions at this point. They need to be dismantled, because people of power are not often willing to give up that power. So we need to restructure the whole thing so that it is more equitable, and that we're coming from a foundation of love, and everybody should be able to identify with that experience.
Yeah. What's interesting as you're speaking, I'm channeling a dear friend about having a basis of love, and also where there is this balance between compassion and care, and also drawing a line about what is okay and not okay. In some of the behaviors we're seeing, and I frequently get the question, but how can I meet so-and-so with love through these horrible, horrible acts? And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, how you've encountered that and worked with that, because you must have run into that in certainly your teaching experience with kids.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, children, youth, and adults, right? So working especially in communities that have faced deep levels of trauma, there has to be a full understanding through mindfulness that the feelings that you have are very valid. Mindfulness is not designed to help people push back their feelings. It's actually the opposite. So as things arise, to welcome those feelings and to look at them and to allow them to be in a space, so much so that you're almost welcoming and befriending them, because in that strength, right, and applying the love toward the trauma, you take its power away. So one of the things, as it relates to coming full circle with mindfulness practices, especially when there is trauma involved, or when there are people who are causing traumatic situations, just like sending them loving kindness, you do it from a distance, right? So always keeping yourself safe, but noticing that if I'm holding anger and hatred in my heart for this person, that's taking up space that could otherwise be filled with love for myself or love for other people and situations that I need to really focus on. So in applying direct anger or direct frustration or direct hate, we take up space within ourselves, right? Our embodiment of those things wear on us more than they do on the people who are inflicting the harm. So we want to be in communities that are doing no harm, but we know that that's not possible. It's not always a perfect situation to be able to do that. So being able to see that and knowing our place in that, and also knowing, unfortunately, when there's just something so much that we can't do, right? There's so much happening in the world that it's easy to become just like compassionately overloaded with issues that you could really take on, and knowing that in my best self, I'm going to send out loving kindness, which may seem like a really small thing, but it's energy nonetheless. And through that energy, it'll pass through me, it'll pass through everybody in front of me, everybody behind me, and all sides of me, so that it can almost become contagious. And that's where the change is going to happen, a rippling effect that we need to get to, of good and positive intentions for one another.
So what would you like to see, just yourself personally, in mindfulness in the next few years? How do you want to see that take root and grow?
You know, for me, similar to the way that we use Black Lotus Rising with the shirts that have the various sayings on it, for it to be in homes first, right? Because we're all growing out of our immediate families, and we're growing out of our smaller communities. And when you have the soil so rich with wonderful intention, positive energy, deep loving feelings, and embodied sense of compassion and empathy, then anything that grows out of that soil is going to have remnants of that. And hopefully we can get to a place that the generations of children who are learning mindfulness in their schools are going to be able to apply what they're learning to every aspect of their lives. So whether it be the people in their lives, their immediate environment, the way that they enter into the work field, the way that they manage other people, the way that they show up for work, the way that they invest in their relationships, the ways that they invest in themselves, their thoughts around money and entitlement and engagement, right? Because oftentimes there are many communities that just don't, because of the way that they've been treated over the years, they don't even feel entitled to that level of abundance and kindness and love, right? Those things have been beaten out of them or scared out of them or policed out of them to have a misunderstanding that you're not entitled to those things. So if we can return to bringing that into the foundations of our earth that we walk on, the homes that we live in, the schools that we attend, the institutions that we frequent, then we'll see this whole shift. Because negative behaviors and racism and bias, those are learned behaviors. I don't believe that they're innate in anybody, and they're learned behaviors. So as adults in the community, we're always the example and we're always the models. And we need to be conscious of that, consciously aware, fully mindful of how we're being in the world and how we're reflecting positive and loving values for our children to absorb.
Yeah. And one of the opportunities, I think, to help plant the seeds of that is in working with a younger generation, maybe several younger generations. And one of the reasons I had initially reached out to you to do this interview was on a youth of color retreat, a teens of color retreat. It's coming up August. As of this recording, we're in February right now. I wonder if you might say a little bit about that. And we'll have a link to this on the episode page for those who are listening, by the way.
Oh, yes. I'm really happy and excited to talk about this. This Teens of Color Mindfulness Retreat has been in the works for quite a while. IBME, which is Inward Bound Meditation Education, is an organization, and now it's international, that has mindfulness retreats primarily for youth in the summertime, but has extended to spring break and holiday seasons when people are off from work and school. And there's a young adult component and older adult component as well. And for the first time in the history of this organization, there's going to be a Teens of Color Mindfulness Retreat, and it's going to be in Big Bear City this August. So I get to be there. I get to work on this amazing project. We're looking to bring teens of color together so that they can have a felt experience. And their dialogue and conversations while on retreat can really speak to what it is that they're experiencing in the world right now. And all of the IBME retreats are fabulous in that the young people get to come and fully be themselves. And when I say we welcome everyone to show up in their fullness, we completely welcome everyone to show up in their fullness. And this particular retreat is an affinity retreat because it's important and it's necessary. And our young teens of color especially need to have safe spaces where they can be heard, where they can be seen, and where they can experience mindfulness in a safe space without having to worry about masking or coding or anything. So they are free to just really be themselves and to absorb and to release anything that might be heavy on their heart.
Great. Well, as I mentioned to those who are listening to this, I will have a link to that retreat on the episode page for this episode. I also want to talk a little bit about Black Lotus Rising. Tell us about that.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So this is a baby of mine. I have 2 teenage daughters. And anybody, let me not be so general, but my teenagers have had moments of great strength and success and moments of great challenge. And we've had that experience within our relationship as parent and child, mother and daughter, and all of the things and the joy that comes with that experience. And we were talking about the mindfulness practices and all the things that we do. And I have little sayings, as many families do, that things that I say all the time, things that they say all the time. And we just came up with an idea like, let's put that on a shirt. and then we were talking about my daughter attends Loyola Marymount University, and we were talking about helping her form a mindfulness group because she was feeling particularly stressed around studying and the college life and the transition and all of that. So, like I said, this has been a go-to for our family for years. And we were talking about her being able to put a group together. And we were trying to figure out what would entice young people to want to participate. So we came up with the first sweatshirt, which was Colored Girls Meditate, right? Because the thought is that maybe they don't, because you don't typically see them in those communities. You don't typically see them in those circles. We don't know that this is a tool and a skill, a modality for self-care. So we came up with those first shirts, and it just kind of took off. It went beyond the teenagers having the shirts to me wanting to and often wearing mine, and then my girlfriends and my fellow practitioners and people that I attend Dharma circles with, and outside of that as well. And then it just kind of started blossoming because we would be home together and just like, and what about this one? And what about manifesting? And what about breathing? And all the things that we do and say. And it has been received so incredibly well. I mean, across all demographics, people have purchased these shirts. I have families that have purchased it. I have couples that have purchased it. I have people that I went to middle school that I have on my social media that have purchased it for themselves and their families. We have people that have repeat purchased. So they got them and they were just like, oh my God, we wear these shirts all the time. And now I saw such and such and I want to pick one up for them. So it's been like wildfire. And the girls, believe it or not, they really manage this business a lot on their own. Like they do the invoicing, they manage the website, the packaging, the going to the post office. Like I'm obviously involved because I'm the one who's driving and I have the car, but they are definitely, they make a lot of the videos, which are very silly if you've ever seen them, and a lot of fun. They're really into it, and they've been learning a lot about business. And that was one of the things that was most important for me, was for them to have a stake in this and to be able to learn how to have multiple streams of income and to direct their energy towards positive things that help them grow as young people, and to increase their sense of awareness of money and management and time spent and resources, and how to really be in the world. So it's been full circle for us. I'm really grateful that they're getting so much out of it. I'm glad that the many communities that we're in have been so receptive to them. And I look forward to seeing what we can do with it. But the goal was definitely originally to bring young people together in the space of being able to meditate and help to relieve some of the stress and some of the inner challenges that we were facing. And what has ended up happening is I've been on retreats several times and wearing my shirts, and people across the board are finding great solace in having them as a day-to-day kind of reminder of how they want to be and who they want to be in the world.
That's wonderful. Well, for those who are listening again, I'll be linking to that as well, blacklotusrising.org, on the episode page for this episode. Jylani, what else would you like to share with the listeners? Maybe just some parting thoughts about what's been energizing your heart lately.
Yeah, I'm particularly inspired by the leaders of color who have stepped up and stepped out into so many public spaces around bringing mindfulness to the communities. And they've been doing it in such a way that is so inclusive, even within our own community, right? So people across whatever religious faith you have, whatever practices among the different gender and sexuality and ability, all of the things that we like to diversify, people of color have been coming into the space and hopefully more and more been receiving a loving and supportive container to be there. And that is what I am really, really excited about for myself, obviously, for my immediate community, and extending it out. So knowing that I can reach out and get help or get support and assistance in ways that I haven't been able to do before, and that I can also be of service to those who are wanting to be more included and to experience mindfulness in a space of community. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm grateful for you for hosting this and bringing all this up to the forefront, because it is so important that each of us are doing our work in ways that feel whole and good and safe for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are interested, be sure to check out the episode page. I'll have a couple links there for you. Do take a look at what's there on blacklotusrising.org and check out their Facebook page as well, because you're going to see some of those videos we mentioned, which are silly and
Yeah.
fun. And
Yeah.
your daughters do a great job on that. Our guest today, Jylani Brown, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.